Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report, Monday's edition, broadcasting today from rainy Irvine, California. If you saw the Sunday Night Football telecast last night, that system's moving down our way. So anyhow, we thought we'd shake it up a little bit here today. Hey folks, we always like when we have congressional candidates come on the show, and we've got a really special guy today. Max Beckwith is a veteran. He is a conservative, and I'm going to let him really describe his candidacy to you because he's running through the Republican Party in the Republican primary, but he's got some views that differ a little bit from the current incumbent. So Max, welcome to Schaftlein Report. Happy to have you as my guest today.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hey Max, first of all, give everybody our listening and viewing audience a little bit about your background, your service, and then your political leanings as you enter the Republican primary here in the 7th District in North Carolina.
Certainly. So I'm a United States Marine, got out in 2013. I went in 2009. I was a combat engineer, so my job was essentially demolitions, counter IED, that kind of stuff. So I did 2 tours in Afghanistan, got out, did odd jobs here and there, then decided I needed to work for myself, so started a very, very small business, doing handyman, just general stuff while going to school full time. Finished, fast forward 6 years, superintendent for a big construction company, about to start my own business, another business of mine again. And yeah, it's just got my degree in political science and everything like that. And I was not going to run for Congress for a couple years. And then the whole Afghanistan debacle under Biden happened, and then that just kind of sent the catalyst of, well, if not now, when? Mm-hmm. And then looking at my opponent, incumbent David Rouser, he is a conservative about 85% of the time.
Okay.
If biggest example would be this last National Defense Authorization Act. He was one of the 138 Republicans that voted yes for the NDAA, which had red flag laws in it. Which, as a conservative NRA supporter, I don't see how you can support any bill that is going to strip people's constitutional liberties to own firearms and put it in the hands of people who don't know them to strip them away. So there's a number of issues that are different in terms that I think that the Republican Party is actually falling on. They're failing very, very heavily, which one of them is the fact that there's no real big difference right now between Democrats and Republicans. There hasn't been in about 20 years. Republicans nowadays, if they're not veterans who are coming up trying to beat an incumbent or going up against a Democrat, they're get along, just going with the motions. They're in it for the fame of being a congressman and not really having to work anymore, because you serve one term in Congress, you get a pension for life and medical. So it's just one of those things where it's very antithesis to the founding fathers' viewpoints on not having career politicians. That's one of the things that I'm a big supporter of, being like term limits. I'm not going to make a lot of friends, considering that one of the bills I want to pass is the Anti-Corrupt Bureaucrats and Politicians Act, which is something that I'm getting written up, which essentially it forces an audit every year of every congressional member through social media, banking, whatever it is, because you are a public figure, everything's public record. And the whole, like, for example, Nancy Pelosi over the past decade, I didn't own stock, but my family did, and all the beneficial stock exchanges and everything that her husband and her family did. I mean, that's a giant red flag to me, and there should be an audit, special counsel, third-party auditor. And if there's something found like that, then what is you get about a 3-month grace period of they're going to investigate you. You get stripped of your committees until you're proven innocent or whatever. And if you're found guilty, the sergeant of arms comes, puts you in cuffs, takes you to Capitol Police, and you go to the tombs. You don't collect $200, you don't pass go, and then you wait for sentencing.
Well, Max, your positions are different. You have more of a libertarian leaning background. Tell our viewing and listening audience over our podcast network, your political philosophy, because it is a little bit different. You are running in the Republican primary, but your political background is one of a more libertarian leaning. Am I correct?
Yes, I distinguish myself as a constitutional libertarian running on a Republican ticket. I intentionally put Republican third, not first on that list, because, like I said, the Republican Party, if you want to go into the deep trenches of philosophy of the founding fathers, you have the Federalists, who are Alexander Hamilton's Hobbesian big government theorists, and you have Thomas Jefferson's Democratic Republican Party, who were Lockean theorists, small government, and it stayed that way. Federalists becoming the Whig Party, becoming the Democratic Party, and then Democrat Republicans becoming Republicans, and just it kept that way until about mid 90s. Then it kind of started to shift, and everyone kind of went to the Hobbesian side of things. So yeah, there's some Republicans that say they're for limited government, but in reality, look at their voting record and you can tell where the money's going and who they're really for. So I am a conservative in certain aspects, but I distinguish between conservatism and constitutionalism, because not conservatism in and of itself, if you look at the traditional aspect of it, is keeping things as the status quo, keeping things traditional, which there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when you have people who are so ingrained in that they can't think another way, and they can't view something in a different light, and especially when it comes to something that's constitutional. Constitutional libertarian, it goes easy. It's, hey, bill's being passed. Is it constitutional? No, don't vote for it.
Right.
Is there anything in it that prevents it? Nope. All right, well, then it passes the first checkpoint. Second checkpoint, libertarianism. All right, it's constitutional, but is it going to strip people's freedoms and liberties? Yes, you don't vote for it. No, it actually expands it. Okay, fine, then you vote for it. It's literally that simple.
Max, take that philosophy and let's talk a little bit about the big elephant in the room bill that's currently making all the news, and that's the two bills before Congress. The $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, which includes $600 billion in spending. This is what I call, folks, the real infrastructure bill. Roads, bridges, highways, water treatment facilities, rural broadband. Max, that bill's favored by 80% of the American public, and it passed the Senate with 19 senators voting for it. It's stalled in the House of Representatives because the radicals, the far left-wing radical, they call themselves progressive, they're not, they're socialist, they've held that bill up. Okay, now word comes out, Max, over the weekend that Biden has narrowed that bill down to 2. Manchin and Sinema haven't agreed to a figure of $2 trillion. They don't know how they're going to pay for it. Now they're throwing out the idea of, well, we're going to create a billionaire's tax on the top 700 families in the country. It almost seems like, Pelosi gets on a Sunday show, again, lies to her constituents, which they've been doing now for months, about where this bill is. Applying that libertarian philosophy, Max, if you were in Congress right now, how would you take positions relative to the first bill, which is the real infrastructure bill, and then the second one, which is a total monstrosity that has been whittled, started at $6.5 trillion, then it went to 3.5. Now, quote, word out of Washington, it's somewhere around 2. Your thoughts on those two bills, Max?
All right, so I'm gonna tackle the second one first, actually. Okay. So I'm a businessman, and anyone who's been, and that's one of the issues we have with Congress, is not a lot of congressmen actually run businesses, make paychecks and payroll and everything like that.
Absolutely.
And have debts and accountability and stuff like that. So here's my question. How is anything paid for when we're $28 trillion in debt?
Right.
That's like me saying, as a business owner, I got $5 million in debt, but you know what? I'm not going to pay it. I'm going to go get $1 million credit card and just start swiping stuff left and right, and IRS will never come after me because I'm special. That's essentially what the government is right now. Is it's just a wasteful spending machine. So there's a couple of things. One, I'm for standalone bills. I don't believe that you should have 50 million things, riders attached to a bill. You have a standalone bill, stands on its legs, stands on its merit, period. End of discussion.
Agree with you 100%. Keep going.
Secondly, if they for fiscal bills and for like the NDA, which is, there's going to be a lot of components into it. You can't do just a standalone bill. Even if you do this as like an NDA standalone bill, it's going to have hundreds of pages to it. We have what is the bill that's like, what was it, 1.5 million or $1.5 million per page is what if you break down the actual spending of the $1 trillion that it is. And that's just outlandish. So what I believe, and like the whole Obamacare thing where Nancy Pelosi is like, well, we have to pass it to see what's in it.
Right.
That's the stupidest argument I've ever heard in my life. So I think that every bill, when it goes for a vote, every congressman and senator should be required to sign an affidavit saying they've read every single letter, every single dotted, all the I's, read all the words,
right.
And they've read the bill, they understand it, and then that way when they vote on it, if they get called on something and say, oh, I didn't read that part, well, then now you're lying on a sworn affidavit. Now you're held in contempt of Congress.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting.
So,
It's interesting. Let me comment on what you said. Manchin and Sinema have been reading these drafts, and they're not for it. And 50 Republicans in the Senate are saying no to this monstrosity.
yeah, but that's the problem is you have these people, these unelected bureaucrats who just write all this legislation. I also believe unless the congressman or senator pens 10% of the bill himself, it shouldn't be allowed in Congress.
Right, because of staff drafting the bills, and right, understood.
Staff is fine. Staff is included. I'm saying they have specific bureaucratic departments in Washington that are not elected, non-affiliated, that they just write bills for lobbyists. And lobbyists get them in the people's hands.
Yep.
And then they get voted on. And it's like that's not how it's supposed to work. Like if you don't write at least 10% of this bill yourself, you and your staff, then it shouldn't be allowed.
So Max, I take it that if you were in Congress and Pelosi put that bill up, you would join every other Republican congressman voting no on that monstrosity.
Oh, 100%. And any conservative that voted for it, I would make sure they'd get primaried.
Oh, 100%. What about now the $1.2 trillion bill that did include $600 billion in new spending, a bill that does have 80% of the American public supporting it? There's never been a vote in the House on that because Pelosi's holding it up. How do you see that one going, and philosophically, what are your thoughts on that bill?
So I am 100% for infrastructure and for spending money here in the United States. The way I would solve that is we spend about $400 billion overseas in foreign aid to almost, I think, north of 210 countries, vast majority of which don't do anything for us. And I know everyone wants to be this whole bleeding heart of, oh, we need to take care of our neighbors. Well, how about we take care of our own streets and our own people first before we take care of other people? So I have a policy that to get humanitarian aid, you have to meet one of 2 out of 3 requirements. You have to benefit America geopolitically, economically, or militarily. If you want military and humanitarian aid, you have to meet all 3 of those requirements. I would take the top 12 countries that meet 2 to 3 of those requirements, fund them, take the other $320 billion and bring it back and repatriate it here and pay for the infrastructures and everything else that we want to do. And then on top of that, when we have money that's left over, we just don't go spending it. We actually go and start paying off our debt with the remainder.
Yep. Max, you're consistent in your philosophy. I'm going to give you a lot of credit for that because you are saying what you believe, and that's a refreshing quality in a candidate. Let me ask you this, Max, shift the subject a little bit. Your district, the 7th District, tell me a little bit about that district. Purple, blue, red, obviously you've got a Republican congressman in there right now. Talk a little bit about the district and what are the key issues that North Carolinians in the 7th District are talking about?
So North Carolina 7th District is very rural, agricultural, and it's also, you have that, then you have the densely populated Wilmington area and south of Raleigh and everything like that. So you have, it's a purple district as far as the cities, because that's where the heavy density population is. For North Carolina, some of the biggest issues is like the healthcare issue and expansion of Medicaid. There's the housing issue that we have with a lot of Section 8 housing revitalizations that need to occur. And then part of my thing is I worked I was one of only the very few contractors that actually work in the not so nicer neighborhoods and do work at a very budget friendly for people and getting a good reputation doing that. And I think there needs to be a bill or a policy. We just spent $14 million on a new amphitheater, but we can't use that to get people's houses fixed up so the next hurricane that comes through, they get light cost replacement instead of getting pennies on the dollar. So that's an example. Agriculture, big tobacco state, and feed corn, soybeans, stuff like that. Tobacco, I think we are the number 1 or number 2 right now. I think we're number 1 seller of tobacco. But tobacco sales have declined because of everyone's getting more health conscious and everything like that. So there's how do we fund, how are the farmers going to keep putting food on their table? How are we going to help with the Medicare expansion problem that people want to have? How are we going to help with the housing issue? So there's a lot of these issues that are important to North Carolinians, including in North Carolina, human trafficking is a big issue as well. Yeah, so that's a big one. The last thing was like 400 or 40 million people are human trafficked worldwide between 2009 and 2016.
It's a big issue, no question about it. Yeah, and some of that trafficking, Max, is coming across our southern border. I mean, on a national basis, national issues that you talked about on your website. You mentioned, about the Afghanistan debacle. You talk about term limits, free speech, censorship. Give us a sense of your positions on these, because it's going to be a combination of local and national issues when the primary comes up next year.
Yeah, that's true. So I don't disagree that we should have left Afghanistan a while ago, but how Biden did it was just
disaster.
I was a grunt on the ground, boot stomper finding IEDs, and I could tell you don't pull air support before anything else. That's like the last thing you do. Right. You don't abandon a militarized air base that has 2 airstrips for a non-militarized 1-strip airfield. That's just it's the entire thing to me. And this is gonna sound whatever, but to me it sounds like it was almost intentional to create such a massive debacle that we have no other choice but to go back in for another 10 years.
It's interesting you mentioned that.
That's just my honest opinion.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because we've had everybody from regular troops that have served there to 3-star generals that have come on this show. They haven't said comments directly like yours, but they've inferred the fact that, the way we left, it wasn't the issue of leaving, it was how we left, and just the sheer catastrophic decisions made which led to the outcomes that we were left with, and not the national embarrassment, a global embarrassment that the United States under Biden executed a plan that his military advisors in the aftermath warned him would happen had he gone down the path that he did.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I agree that the national advisors did tell him that this could potentially happen. But the blame doesn't rest with just Biden. Blame rests with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It rests with all of his advisors who, I'm sorry, if I was a general in that room and I advised you not to do this and you still did it, and I knew it was going to be such a big giant debacle, I would have taken my stars and thrown them on the table and said, all right, you either stop doing this or I'm out. None of those generals did it. None of them took responsibility for it in a timely fashion. They all tried to pass the buck. And to me, that's one of the that's one of the real reasons why my family's been military. I'm an 8th generation Marine. My family's been in the military since the Civil War and before. So it's the politicalization of the higher ranks. It's
plain
people who don't have skin in the game, and this is going towards the politicians, and I include the Joint Chiefs in this and everything like that. People who write the ROEs for the people on the ground should be people who have been on the ground and actually suffered under poor ROEs.
Yeah.
I know for a fact 13 people when I went to Afghanistan. I know for my first tour, 13 people died directly as a direct result to Obama and Hillary Clinton's poor ROE policy. It was so bad to the point where you couldn't shoot someone even if they were pointing a rifle right at you. You had to wait for them to actually engage you before you could shoot them. That's how stupid the ROEs are.
Yeah, well, that's what you get under Democratic presidents, these stupid rules, and it's passed along through the generals and through the Joint Chiefs and down the command chain. And we didn't have that under Trump, thank God, but under Obama you did, and Biden it made it even worse.
Here's another thing: the Democrats want to blame Trump. Oh, it was Trump's plan to get out in March, and we did it in what was it, September 11th. And I'm like, yeah, you took an extra 5 months to do what Trump was going to do before, and yet you made it even worse.
Right.
Yeah, there's no sense. You can't blame somebody when you give yourself more time.
Well, Max, the key point is when the national media go against you, and the national media in this country is the political arm of the Democratic Party. When the national media basically calls it a debacle, and not just one, every damn one of them did, you're in trouble. And Max, let's not kid ourselves. Between the debacle, the catastrophic exit in Afghanistan, 170,000 people a month crossing that southern border when that idiot Mayorkas, who says, oh no, this border's secure, I'm referring to the Secretary of DHS, you've got 170,000 people coming across a month, Border Patrol stretched to the max, the catastrophic exit of Afghanistan, the inflation rate in this country, consumer price index 5.4%, crime in our major blue cities escalating, all types of crime, not just murder, but shoplifting, car theft, you name it. And now that's contributing to Biden's approval rating sitting here between 38 and 42%. Call it a 40% average approval rating and about a 55% disapproval. Max, that's not good for Biden. And you hate to say it because he's our president. We wish he would do good. But those bad poll numbers are contributing to a malaise in this country, and Republicans stand to greatly benefit from that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So in 2022, we see that kind of stuff. But it's interesting too, Max. You talked about that spending bill. Democrats aren't even in agreement on their own bill. I mean, they can't come to terms on how much to spend and how it's going to be paid for. Max, this latest idea of taxing the 700 wealthiest people in the country, you and I both know that's an insane policy. I mean, to think that 700 people are going to pay for an entire bill, at the end of the day, they always write it in the middle income Americans, the upper income middle Americans. That's who ends up ultimately paying for these monstrosities.
Yep. And it's funny, they always try to push this socialism. I mean, it used to be that socialism used to be this nomenclature that only really Bernie Sanders was the adamant socialist. But now everyone's socialist now. And I have a theory that they're not socialists. They're actually undercover commies.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest. Call a spade. But they can't be communism. They can't be open communists of the card-carrying communists, because then they wouldn't be allowed to run for federal office.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So that's why they're not open communists. It's a shame. It's you got these people that they, like you said, with the tearing down of the monuments and everything. What's the old homage? Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it.
Right.
And it's right now we're living in both in the tearing down of statues and then the censorship on media and everything, that we're living in a Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451.
It's a little insane at times. It certainly is.
Or living in what is it? Orwell's book. Was it 1984?
1984. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So. It's almost like the pinnacle of those two are coming to fruition right now.
Let me ask you this, Max. A lot of elections come down to the economy. Gas prices right now, oil's above $82 a barrel. Gas in many parts of the country is at all-time highs. Here in California, we surpassed $5 a gallon over the weekend. I know that's not represent the rest of the country, but again, in North Carolina, I mean, inflation's high, gas is high. Are people concerned about the escalating, cost of everything and this supply chain shortage we're having to deal with?
Oh yeah, my wife's not huge into politics. She's not her forte, and even she's she started, because we live on about 3.5 acres out here in the country, so she's got her chicken. She started prepping canning stuff and everything like that. And when my wife starts getting worried about food shortages, there's an issue.
Oh,
so
I hear you.
But yeah, no, I mean, things like for 4 pounds of meat right now for ground beef, just regular grain, it's I think it was $14 for 4 pounds of ground beef. That's outrageous.
Pretty high.
Now in California, it's probably much worse.
Actually, California food prices they're pretty stable out here, because we have a lot of people don't realize, but a big chunk of the state of California is agricultural. A lot of the fruits and vegetables, and we're the Central Valley of California is a big agricultural area, and the rest of the country gets a lot of the food supply comes out of California. So it's really not so bad out here because transportation costs are lower. But again, in your
doesn't help when you have truckers shortage and not able to get it.
Well, that's another thing. I mean, I saw in the news earlier today, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, is saying, "Hey, if you can't get the ports loaded there, we'll help you in Florida." Well, I like Governor DeSantis a lot, but to get ships from Cali to Florida, that's not going to work. But that is a big problem in this supply chain. I mean, when you go around your district, Max, okay, if you could pick out 1 or 2 issues that people coming up to you talking about, what would those top 2 issues be?
Healthcare and the economy.
Healthcare and the economy. Big price. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a big.
And when you talk to them, do you get the question, okay, Max, if I vote for you, okay, how can you help us out? Because, this is where we're hurting. What do you say to them?
So I'm in the camp of, as far as the fiscal budget goes, I like Rand Paul's idea of 1% cut 1% of every line item budget for every department.
Yep.
Which, in the grand scheme, $100 million versus $99 million, you're not going to see much of a difference for a department. So I like that. Repatriating, like I said, those $400 billion a year we spend to stupid stuff across the country, across the world, bringing that money back in. If you just did those simple things, and then just other simple things that we don't have enough time to get into, but federal contracting for like the bases and everything like that. Excuse me. We probably waste $1 trillion a year on liquidated damages costing because government stupidity and bureaucracy. So, I mean, there's a number of things that goes into it in terms of that. As far as the healthcare side of things, one of the big things that I've always had a question on when healthcare is how come if you have a car and you get car insurance and you drive to another state, you're covered. But if you go to another state and you get injured, then you don't have proper healthcare for that. You have your in-network, your out-of-network. Your out-of-network isn't going to cover you if you're in California and you're from New York or whatever. Like, it's not going to cover you, so you're paying out of pocket for everything. Why not allow for a third one, which is in-network, out-of-network, and then out-of-state policy?
Wow,
allow for insurance companies on the private market, private exchange. Don't federalize it. Just allow for the private markets to be able to write a third policy saying, hey, if you go to another state and you get injured, it's X amount more on your premium.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Has that idea caught on among your constituents, Max? Have they talked to you about trying to push that?
Some of my more adamant supporters are definitely on board with that. They kind of scratch their head with me. It's like they've never heard anybody talk about that. They don't remember everybody ever saying anything like that. And I was like, well, it just seems like a non-starter to me. I mean, it's just basic common sense.
So Max, we're heading into end of October. The Dems are going to try to pass this bill. I don't think we're going to get it done by the end of October, but we'll see. Then, you get towards the holiday season. Do you expect that some type of bill, notwithstanding the fact that Manchin, Sinema, and we'll call them, quote, moderate Democrats in the House still don't want any part of this monstrosity. But, in Washington, it's the only place in the world where they could spend $1.7 to $2 trillion and it'd be called a cut, from the infamous $3.5 trillion bill. How do you handicap this for me? How do you think it ends up panning out over the next 30 days? And what will it mean heading into the 2022 midterms?
One of two, it'll pass because the whips in the House and the Senate start whipping up their votes. Let's be honest, they went after Trump for quid pro quo, but that's all Congress does day in, day out is quid pro quo with each other. Throw some little blackmail in there as well, and you probably got a good idea of what they're doing day to day with their fellow elected officials. So it'll probably pass, whether or not it's before Christmas or come springtime. I couldn't tell you. I think it'll be probably between Christmas and Thanksgiving they'll pass it some way, somehow. And then you're going to have almost a year to see the fruits of that. And it's going to be, if they pass it, it's going to be a landslide victory for the Republicans come November.
I concur with that totally, because people, again, right now people don't understand what's in the bill. They don't know how it's going to be paid for. All they hear is this giant price tag, and they hear these crazy programs, and you get that clown Sanders out there saying, well, the American people want this, and yet 75% of polling says no, they don't. That more people are concerned about inflation and the size of government than going out and expanding the government safety net. And yet these hardcore leftists, and that's what they are, folks. We tell you all the time, these aren't your dad's politician or my dad's Democrat. These are far left-wingers, and that's the base of the Democratic Party. The centrist part has shrunk. Again, with Manchin and Sinema still opposed to a lot of portions of these bills, I'm not sure what's going to pass, but I do know one thing. The Democrats continue lying to their constituents. But again, we're going to be favorably optimistic. Hopefully this thing gets whittled down where maybe even progressives can't stomach it, and we'll see how it ends up playing from there. But Max, we got about a minute left. Give me your vision for where you want to see this country go, and as you run into the primary in March, I think your primary is March of 2022. Give it to you.
Yeah, it's March 8th, 2022, Republican primary. My goal of government is to get it back to essentially the founding fathers' vision. So as a constitutional libertarian, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments are sacrosanct. And most importantly, I know people talk about the first and second, but the 10th Amendment, the states' rights. I want to see government so whittled down to where they just deal with international policy, domestic and foreign trade, and military affairs, and that's it. As a constitutional libertarian and a conservative, I eliminate the IRS, eliminate the Department of Education, I mean, I want to see as bare bones down as possible on a federal government and put everything back to control of the states. The states know what's best for their people.
Well, Max, I tell you what, we really appreciate your views. Folks, Max, tell our viewers, if they want to help your campaign, where do they go?
So you just go to max4congress.net, max, M-A-X, number 4, and then congress.net. And you can see my platform, see everything, and you can donate directly from there. And same thing on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Max4Congress.
Great. Well, Max, again, thank you for joining us today. And folks, if you want to follow us on that, the show will be on Facebook today, Rumble. We're on all of the platforms for podcasts. Max, terrific having you as our guest today. And folks, we will be back tomorrow on Tuesday. Look forward to seeing you then. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mark.